Welcome to the Podcast Superfriends. 5 podcast producers from across North America get together to discuss podcasting.
Well, spooky season is certainly here, and the Podcast Super Friends are here to help you with any podcasting tricks or treats that you might want to be hearing about this season. My name is Catherine O'Brien. I'm from Branch Out Programs. Joining me are the Podcast Super Friends from all over the North America. Johnny, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Johnny, and I'm the guy who just realized that we should have all worn Halloween costumes to this.
Oh.
I'm Matt from Canada, where I'm thankful that we did not wear any costumes for this.
I'm David Yasenboston, pod617.com, with a wealth of spooky sound effects ready to go.
My goodness. Wow. Well, by the way, I think that we're all dressed as podcasters. That was the costume that I was bringing here today. Professional podcaster. I'm not wearing shoes.
On brand.
Yes. So we are here to talk about some of the tricks and the treats of the podcasting world as we're coming in. Oh, if you are a regular listener of the Podcast Super Friends, Jag in Detroit won't be joining us today. He's being a Disney adult, as Disney adults go. So we're missing him, but we'll have him back on the next Podcast Super Friends. But in the meantime, we do want to talk about some tricks and some treats. There's a lot that's going on in sort of the podcasting zeitgeist, so we're going to touch on those things a little bit. And I'm glad, Dave, that you have some sound effects for us, because one of my treats is the great resource of freepd.com, which is a free place where you can get some music, and they've got a great selection of some spooky sounds that podcasters, there's still plenty of time to bring into your podcast. If you need a royalty-free song, check out some of the spooky sounds at freepd. What do you got in your bag of tricks there for us, sound-wise, David?
Well, I've got a scream here. This sound, of course. So now, since you brought up one source of stock sounds and music, I'll mention another one. It's one familiar to many on this call and maybe many of our listeners, and that's the Descript app. And so if you're on Descript, if you haven't used it, you got to try it. It's got 1,000,001 functions that are useful for the podcaster, transcribing your show, editing your show, audio and video. They've kind of changed it over the years here and there. At present, on if you go to the bottom right-hand corner of the app, it says stock. And under stock, you will find videos, GIFs, backgrounds, and also there's a little sub-tab that says audio, where you can search for music or sound effects. And really anything you desire. You know, you want a horse, you want a horse neighing, you want a car crash, you'll come up with a bunch of different, and it's very easy to insert that right into your podcast, and all royalty free. So there's a treat for you. Is that good, Catherine?
That is absolutely perfect. Descript is becoming more and more.
Sorry, that was a car crash. Go ahead.
More and more useful. I am loving Descript these days. So that's always nice to be able to have a little shortcut to all of the extra features. Now, the sounds that you're giving us right now, how are you doing that? Do you have a soundboard? What are you dropping them in?
Yeah,
give us a little insight.
Good question. Not using Descript app for this. There are a bunch of different soundboard apps. I use one called Farrago, Farrago, Farrago. I don't even know how it's pronounced, but I've had it for years, and it just gets the job done. It's got maybe you can put as many as 50 or 60 of these sounds that you can display. You can label them, of course. It's a free app, and so you got to get the sounds first. It comes with just a very small sampling. But once you get your sound file, which you could get from the likes of Descript or anywhere you find them, load them up. You can have different tabs. You can have different soundboards for different kind of shows. And so then you can color code them. Very useful. Farrago.
Very good. I actually just last week I looked up the word, not the app, but the word Farrago, because Walter Kern, who I like to listen to his podcast, and we've brought him up before on the show, he uses that word a lot. So to me, it's my own personal Walter Kern drinking game when he brings up the word Farrago, which means a confusing mix. That's just our vocabulary for the day.
Okay, I learned something. I didn't even know what it meant. Okay,
we're here to learn something. I'm not here to just expand podcasting knowledge. I'm here to help you through your vocabulary as well. Maybe it'll come up on Wordle. Who knows? Maybe it'll come up on a crossword. I don't know. Matt Kundle, you have some tricks up your sleeve. Why don't you share one with us right now?
Yeah, this one's going to dovetail right off Dave's, and it's also involving Descript, and it's something that three of us tried. Dave, we would have let you try, but you left on Friday, and that's Rooms. So Descript Rooms is in beta, and this is going to be the follow-up to Squadcast. It doesn't sound like they're going to be doing too much more work on Squadcast in the future. So I think the Squadcast product is, you can kind of see it being sort of moved to the back, and they put Rooms into beta. So if you are a Descript user, you can just go to the website that I just posted on the screen. I'll also post it in the chat. It's descript.com/rooms. You can sign up for the beta, and they're pretty quick. They'll turn it around fairly quickly and give you access to it. Now, we tried it the other day, and it doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles that Squadcast has, because, again, it's just in beta. I think they just want to make sure it works before they start to really unleash it. So you can't really send anybody a calendar invite. You can't really... There's a lot of things you just can't do. I think one of the things that we all look for as producers is we look for the ability to see, okay, so Johnny's using a Shure microphone and David's using a Rodecaster, and seeing that production stuff. I think that's the thing I really want to see from Descript Rooms, is the ability to go in there and to start messing with some of the tools that people are using just to help them out. Because let's face it, I can't speak, I can't hear you. That happens all the time just before we get together with podcasters. Setups are just different everywhere. But so far, I think Johnny was the one who recorded with Rooms, and we listened back to the sound, and we thought it was pretty good. So far, so good with Descript Rooms.
And I know all of the Descript executives tune into this podcast religiously, given how much we talk about them.
You should.
Descript, if you are listening, number one thing you got to be able to do is multi-track exporting. Not everyone is going to record. I know the idea is to record into Descript and then edit within Descript and keep everything in there. It's not there yet. So if I'm going to use it, and I'm going to tell if I'm going to tell my clients, hey, by the way, we should stop using Riverside and we should go use this tool on Descript, I need to be able to export each person's audio and video individually like you can on Riverside. That is just a must-have. So I know it's still in beta. It's probably in the works. Just one podcaster to another, just throwing that over to you.
So I was not aware of that.
We looked at we finished, we recorded for 90 seconds or something just to see how it would turn out, and it just automatically pulls everything up in a Descript project. And when I would try to export it, it would just either export well, you know what, I could be wrong, I could be totally wrong. David, you had something to say.
And
I will happily eat my own words.
No, it might shed light on what you're talking about. You did an audio file or video, right?
It was video, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm wondering if when it records the video, if it appears below on the timeline as different layers or just one layer. Because if it appears in different layers with different videos, then you've got your multi-track export. But I don't know. When you played it back, what did the video look like? I mean, did it look like a Zoom call?
No, the video quality looked really nice, but also we were all using, the cameras that we're using now, which is, right, I guess, what you would expect from the average person to be using. I'm using my phone as a continuity camera. You guys are using webcams, I'm assuming. Dave has a DSLR. What I'm doing right now is I'm just exporting it as a Logic. I'm just going to open that up and see if it spits it out as a multi-track. So carry on.
Carrying on.
So not to belabor this, but all I'm asking is, there were three of you, so did it arrange you nicely, like three boxes in a row, or?
No, you would have to arrange that in
Manually.
post. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe it does each video in a different layer, but again, I don't know. I'll have to play around with it too.
It does do multi-track exporting. Descript, I apologize. I put my head down and cower at your feet. It was harder to find, but it is there.
That's the true podcast scaries, is when we're talking on a live stream and then you have to eat our words. That's the real scary part.
The only people from Descript who listen to this show are the lawyers. So we'll find out.
I'm going to get hit with a
A
cease
cease and desist. Well, on a brighter note, Descript does now have an affiliate program, so the Super Friends should sign up for that. So right quick before the letters
Do you
get
think
to
they'll send us one large check that we have to split, or do we each get our own check based on how positive or negative we've been over the years? Because I've definitely been super negative.
We're about to find out who's the most influential amongst the Super Friend when it comes to Descript. That's all I'm gonna say. Johnny, did you have anything more you wanted to say about the recording experience on Descript?
Oh, the recording experience was great. It was really nice. Like Matt hit on the major stuff. Like you need to be able to schedule out and share links with guests beforehand. I'm sure that's all stuff that they're in progress right now. But for a beta tool, it was really, really clean. We had no lags. We had no issues. The video and audio sounded great. It was very easy to navigate. You kind of, when you're trying out new tools like this, you have to put yourself in the shoes of a podcast guest, not necessarily the host. As the host, if you're doing a show every single week, you understand the routine of I got to plug in my mic and I got to press this button, and then I got to make sure that the mic, and I know where the mic change setting is on Riverside or on Zoom or wherever you are. A lot of the guests that you're bringing on, again, this is all if you're doing a remote show. I feel like that kind of goes without saying, but I will clarify with that. If you're using these remote tools, your guest has to be able to, easily navigate those, where to change your mic, where to change your camera, how to plug things. And the Zoom or the Descript beta room made that very simple. Everything seemed really cleaned up, easily able to find icons and get in and navigate around. So I thought that was a positive. Like Matt said, it's a lot easier to have a producer being able to join you and see what people have plugged in, because there are technologically challenged people out there that say it's plugged in, I swear it's set to that, and it is much more helpful for you to be like, I can see what you have it set as, and it's not that. So let's go through changing that.
And I'm not just talking about the podcast guests. Generally, it's our actual podcasters who I said, well, where's your stuff? Well, I put it in a drawer and I put it away, and then I plug it all back in a week later. And so every week we have this like 10-minute charade of whose mic is on and whose headphones don't work.
Well, and I think that we've all been caught up in, I've had other recording systems where something changes, a log out or whatever, and it defaults to things that you're not expecting. When we come on to other platforms where they remember the last settings that you have, if you're just sort of going on autopilot, it can be very deceptive. And if you're hearing yourself and it sounds good and you think you're getting picked up by your mic, that can be a problem. That happens. That is not something that is that happens to everybody. That's the point there. I wanted to offer up one last little Descripty item before we move away from Descript totally, and that is, and I've already shared this as our group, the Super Friends. We meet as podcast producers to share best practices, and I had the pleasure of attending one of Descript's training workshops. They had a great training workshop about video for marketers. That was the lens through which they were saying, and the big takeaway that I got from that is that Descript is moving to the web browser version of Descript, that they are leaving the local client that you get off of your laptop. Honestly, I would not have known that had I not attended the workshop. And this week I did my first editing job completely from the browser. It definitely was I could tell that there's more of an emphasis being placed on the web browser. It was working very quickly. A lot of the things, applying studio sound, some of the other removing of filler words, it was working a lot faster than it does on the local client. So that was my first experience. I can tell that that's where they're putting all of their emphasis, and it's just a good tip to know. You don't have to be working on the local client. You can start moving to the web browser if you're using Descript.
So
Good news there.
Catherine, we can
Yes.
just get rid of that app from our computer now and just rely on the web.
That's what I did. I did it immediately. As soon as Catherine told me, I deleted the app off my desktop.
Johnny's
Yes,
more carefree than I was. Like, I'm just going to hold on. I need to get a couple of episodes out. I don't want having to redo anything. Then I'll be on that same train.
And as far as I can tell, like I just went to the web version and it's got my whole library of files as soon as I signed in. And so I'll only be slightly afraid to delete the app that I might lose something, but it looks like it's all in the cloud, so not to worry.
Johnny will be our bleeding edge person. I'll be the slightly more, wandering out there. And then Dave, once you have the all clear, it's all safe, then you can go ahead and delete everything.
Then you can delete your Zoom app, Dave. And once Rooms is all settled in, and I will say, David, I mentioned it in the private call. Zoom saved me a couple weeks ago, so I want to buy into a little bit of the Zoom stock that you have. To take a Bill Simmons quote, I'm going to buy a little bit of Zoom stock metaphorically. It is a really great option.
Yeah,
They've
it's all
definitely improved. It is worthwhile.
I mean, it's all about ease of use. Tends to be what I mean. First of all, Zoom has made improvements. Nothing like Descript has, but they got some AI tools in there, and it's just ease of use. If you're worried that your guest isn't very technologically advanced, they probably do know how to use Zoom. Now, maybe this Descript Rooms will be super easy, and it's just one link, and you click on it, and there you go. But not getting rid of Zoom yet.
You just keep hanging on to Zoom. I think that's part of your brand. That's
going down with the ship. Yep.
Matt, another trick or treat for our listening audience?
Yeah, so Chartable's going away. And that's been, I've had a lot of people email me and say, well, I like Chartable. And listen, Chartable's been fun. I think the best things about Chartable over the years has been it lets us know exactly what our Apple rankings are. And then people would go and say, I could put in my Twitter handle that I'm a top 50 podcast host on Apple or something like that. Listen, it's a lot of fun, those charts. But in the end, I think the real thing with Chartable is you could get everybody to sign up, but I'm not sure it would make a lot of money. It got bought by Spotify. And I think Spotify, like many of the things it buys, it wears thin after a while and then they toss it aside. Like so many other things that they've bought over the years. But anyhow, here we are. So a lot of people are looking for a replacement for Chartable. So I have a couple that I will suggest. I think the first one I will suggest is Potter App. So it's potterapp.com is the website. And this is a paid tool, but you can, again, it's very simple. Just putting your prefix into your RSS feed. And then they'll start counting, your downloads from there. It does cost you every month. It's not even sure what the pricing is on it, but they've got 3 tiers. But from there, you'll have some place that they will count. And they'll also give you some pretty good demographics information in there. So they have Google tools inside to really tell you a little bit more about your audience than you're probably getting anywhere else. So it's some pretty detailed stuff. They do a pretty good job with it. Another one I'm going to suggest and this one's going to make
Matt. Sorry, can you? I missed the spelling of that or how to find it. Potter. You said
PODDERAPP.com. Potterapp.com.
Potter app. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah. And so I've full disclosure. I have been working with them over the last few years just to play with their stuff and talk to them and try it out. I kind of like it. But if you want one that doesn't cost any money, I recommend op3.dev. So that's op3.dev, DEV. And the only thing about this that makes people uncomfortable is that the information is public. And so I wanted to go around and ask everybody what they thought about that. Now, I've put a few podcasts up there, including this one, I think are on OP3. So people can go in and see the number of downloads. that we get every week, every month. But the information is really good. It breaks out nicely. I love the way it displays. And, when it comes to just having my stats being public, I'm over it. I'm good. I'm
Do you
fine.
have to submit it yourself, or else it's not on there?
You have to put the enclosure tag into your RSS feed.
Okay.
And then it will start counting. You don't even have to register, I believe, for OP3.
Sidebar. So I just pulled up Potter app. I can't remember what the tag is called, where the tab shows a little indicator. It says chartable alternative. So
Yeah,
they are planting their tags in there pretty well. So for the Potter, and it looks like for an annual fee, it's $9 a month, $39, and then they have an enterprise level, which is it by consultation.
Matt, I think lying is immoral, and it would behoove all podcasters to be on that op3.dev, because it will force you to never lie about how many downloads your podcast is getting again, because every person you talk to, whether it's Joe Rogan or whether it's Joe Schmo who just started a podcast, are lying about how many downloads they got. They're inflating it by at least 1.5 of what they're
Million.
actually getting, which is
Yeah.
fine. Actually, it's not fine.
Is it?
So
Is it? Yeah.
just know that public, yeah, I think you should all do it. I don't think it matters if your show's good. Your show's good. You shouldn't be hiding behind. You shouldn't try to hide how many downloads your show is getting. You should, if it's a free alternative and all you have to do is add it into the enclosure tag, I think it's worthwhile.
I agree. In fact, what I'm gonna try to do here is I'm gonna try to pull up just to give everybody sort of an idea of what it looks like, because I think it's pretty slick. And a guy by the name of John Spurlock has been spearheading this. I've actually been trying to get him to come on the Sound Off podcast, but he's in the middle of a few projects right now. So, but he has promised me that he will get back to me, and hopefully we will get him on the show in the future.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, because I can't wait to just ask the questions about the stuff and what he's got going. So here are the stats for the Sound Off podcast. So again, it's up there. It's there for all to see. You can just go in and listen. If the show you're looking for doesn't have the stats, that's fine. But your show can be up there and do this. And if we scroll down, again, some of the great features that Chartable had, including like how the episodes launched, the trajectory of each one, top countries, U.S. metros, Canadian regions, just some very, very smart, detailed breakouts, browsers referrals. You can, even if you really want, down here is my favorite, you can include bots. I don't know why you would want to include bots, but you can include bots as well into the stats.
Bots
Because
as in,
I wanna
like,
see-
false downloads.
Exactly.
Because Matt, if I'm paying a bot farm to boost up
Download
my
my
podcast, I want to see that it's working.
I want to see a return.
I wanna
Yeah,
see a
if
return,
I'm
man.
showing a potential sponsor my stats so that we can negotiate a rate, I'm turning the bots toggle on.
You can also toggle through each month. So September, October down here for the top countries, U.S. metros. You can go back and forth between the months. I started putting this up last June, so now the details they're really coming together for this. But again, I don't know why we all don't use this. It's done by somebody who knows how to put this together. I had some bad downloads from an IAB certified statistician group. Come back with some stuff. I go, that's not right. But these guys had it right. OP3 had it right. And so I would encourage people to, go ahead and make your stats public, put them up there for all to see. And I can't tell you how much easier it is just telling somebody when they say, hey, can you send me your downloads? No, you can just go look at them over here. I just saved myself at least a half hour worth of work and interruption during the day.
That's great. I think that with a Chartable closing, has it been? Are we sure that has Spotify just put them out to pasture, or is it that they're integrating that technology in with some of the things that Spotify is doing?
If
Do
you
we know
are a
that answer?
Megaphone user, you will get to keep the Smart Links portion of.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're on Megaphone, you will get to use the Smart Links feature going forward.
So they just bought it
Interesting.
for the Smart Links technology?
I really wonder. I think they just buy up the data to see the behavior, and then they make future decisions based on that.
They
And
got mad
I
and
would
shut it down when they saw that Apple Podcast was dominating everyone's share of downloads.
But at the same time, I mean, isn't that why maybe Descript bought Squadcast? They just wanted to see how it worked and bring in all the good tools, and you can just take that data and make rooms and move on from there. Maybe that's you buy it so you can
confirm your prior thesis of we're thinking about doing this. Let's just see if it's worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think that as Spotify, it seems at least in my opinion, that they tried the exclusive route, and now they're trying the come to Spotify, but acknowledging that there's other platforms out there. That might be valuable information to be able to say, how much of your total listenership is coming from Spotify versus these other platforms.
Yeah. So comment here from Terry DeMonte, who is a long time friend of mine, but he raises a very good point, and that's that a locally focused podcast really isn't going to miss something like Chartable, and probably doesn't have as much use for something like OP3. But I think that was the thing with Chartable and being on the Apple charts was, hey, if all my listeners are going to be in Montreal, and that doesn't make it a less successful podcast than one that is national or Joe Rogan or anything else. So I mean, it really does speak to the download and how it really doesn't tell a very good story about the success of a podcast. And I can say that Terry and Ted, it's Terry and Ted Standing By podcast in Montreal. They've really got a good thing going. It speaks to Montrealers. They're filling a void that's left behind by radio. They're actually filling their own void because a lot of people miss their morning show. And so they are filling that in. And I think we've also talked in the past about, local podcasts are now really going to be the future. And they're all really beginning to take off because of the failure of media.
And I just have one small loving counterpoint to Terry, and that is there's nothing more fun than saying about my Baton Rouge focused podcast, I've got listeners in Singapore. How do you like that? There's nothing more fun than that.
Yeah. And to be fair, Terry does have listeners across Canada because, people who do leave Montreal, and a lot of people left Montreal over the years for political reasons, business reasons.
Pourquoi?
Exactly.
I had a couple treats and tricks, Catherine.
Johnny, let's have a treat from you.
So number one would be your pre-recording checklist. So it sprang to mind when we were talking about talking with the guests or talking with the host about their mic inputs. And it reminded me of this is something that actually happened to me 2 weeks ago, where I will jump in on the calls on Riverside with the hosts and the guests beforehand so that I can be the one to say, hey, your window is wide open in the back. It looks like you're completely washed out. We need to plug in your microphone. Can you change this input? So the host just focuses on being the good guy. That's like good cop, bad cop kind of thing. The host is the great guy who we get to have this fun conversation with. And then there's Johnny who comes in who's like, you need to change this. And this is how the recording's going to go. And so we're sitting there and we're going through the checklist. And I go, by the way, do you have a microphone, or can we switch and try around some different inputs? And he goes, oh, I actually have this one. Do you want me to plug this in? And he pulls out this exact microphone. It was just sitting in a drawer. And I go, yes, thank you,
yes,
God. Please plug that in. That is amazing. So pre-recording checklist. If you do not have a producer jumping in on you with shows and you're doing remote recordings, have a step-by-step checklist for you and for your guests. Do I have my mic plugged in? Yes. Do I have my headphones plugged in? Yes. Do I have my internet connection? Do I switch over to my Ethernet cable? Is my Wi-Fi turned on? All of that stuff. Yes. And then go through it with your guests so that you're not forgetting. Hey, asking them, hey, by the way, do you have headphones? And they ask why. And you say, because if the audio is coming out of the speaker, it could pick up by your microphone and cause a loop. It could cause microphone bleed. If you have AirPods, those work great. Let's try it. Let's walk through those. Do you have a microphone? Do you mind going to a quieter room? Please shut your door. Close out of any other applications. All of the checklist, build something out that works for you. All of the things that you've noticed as you've recorded your podcast, just to knock those off, because that makes the whole process so much easier. Big one that people forget: put your phone on do not disturb. That should be bolded. And you don't have to go through this checklist with them. You can put it in a calendar invite. You can send it to them directly, but have something that you go through each time to just prep yourself so that you're trying to duplicate the environment of your recording every single time. So that was number one. If anyone has thoughts on that.
That's an evergreen, great suggestion, Johnny. That's very valuable. And I'm learning more and more about the fact that having something like a checklist is creating a system, and systems free up your brain to think about other things. You can turn things crockpot. You don't set it and forget it. You don't have to keep worrying about it. And it's really important, especially for us as producers, to have those kinds of systems in place, because then we don't have to worry about every single time recreating the wheel as we go through. So I think that's a great tip. David, what are you going to say?
Go ahead.
Johnny.
I was going to say, or what do you do when we lose our host? You wait for him to come back in.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. A little, what happens when? Yeah, a little.
What do you do? How do you riff?
What do you do? How do you riff? How do you keep it going? David, what were you going to say?
No, I'm good. I have a new one when it's time to move on, but a new treat. Yes.
Guess what? It's time for David to bring us a treat. David, what treat do you have for us?
Here's my treat. Actually, it's a trick, I guess. And it's not revolutionary or anything, but it works. So if you have a podcast that is kind of a long-running show and you're building your audience and continuing to produce excellent content, odds are that episode number 25, 50, 102 is going to be a lot better than episode number 1. But guess what episode a ton of your new listeners are going to? Episode number 1. And you might, in fact, be embarrassed by episode number 1, or at least in hindsight. It usually isn't your best episode. So I came up with an idea for one of my podcasts. I created a new audio file and replaced episode 1 with episode 1. But at the very beginning, there was a message from me. It says, "Hey, this is Dave. You've reached, you've clicked on the first episode ever of this podcast. Thank you so much. But by the way, I just need to tell you, this isn't our best episode. And so you might want to cherry pick which episode you go. You might want to find a topic that interests you. Look down the roster. Either way, thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show." You can also put in anything else there that you really want to say to a new listener, because episode 1 is anyone clicking on that like a few months down the road is by definition going to be a new listener. In fact, pretty much anyone, I guess, who's clicking on episode 1 at any time is probably going to be a new listener. So take that for what it's worth. I can't say for sure whether it's working or not, but the podcast continues to build audience. So
do you see that, David, where like episode 1 just has like a lot of downloads in the last month or two?
Yeah, it's always among, for the podcast where I tend to chart it. Yeah, it's always among the top, call it 20 episodes. I'm thinking of a podcast that has this one has 200 episodes, and pretty much always among the top 20 episodes at any given time. Wow. Episode 1 is going to come in. It's going to sneak in there. Do
you have a trailer?
I don't know if we have a trailer. I don't think so.
Get a trailer.
Put the trailer there at the first. Add the trailer as episode 0. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just you can actually mark it as a trailer, but I think that's where it will get placed in those places by default. And I think a lot of people were discovering that problem, and the trailer will either appear at the top in Apple. It also appears in Spotify in a very good spot. But I wonder if you put a trailer in, if it's going to stop the episode 1 downloads.
Right. Yeah. Hadn't thought of that, but does the trailer actually? So it'll actually appear before episode 1, like in any.
It'll usually appear
okay,
like on the page, like on Spotify. Okay. You'll click onto it, and the trailer is usually just right there.
Yeah. I mean, part of the heading.
You should do both, really, right? I mean, if you want to do this little trick that I suggest and address people who are clicking on episode 1, go ahead and do it. And by the way, for those wondering from a technical standpoint, just about any podcast platform that you use will allow you to replace the audio of a given episode. Don't delete it. If you delete it, then it's gone, and you're not going to be able to put in episode 1.
It would be like a dynamic ad insertion, right, David?
Well, this is akin to a dynamic ad insertion, but you don't need dynamic ad insertion. You could use that, of course, to do what I'm describing.
Or you like re-downloading the audio file, going into your software, adding that in, exporting it back out, and swapping it out.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not as quick and easy as using dynamic audio insertion, but
very doable. It's
right.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah. compared to DAI, it's not that it's not easier, but in the long tail, overall, it's easy to do.
Right.
Discussion point for the group. What is the wisdom of doing what David is talking about versus you can put that in. If there's a trailer, you can update it with something new. What about the idea of, I've seen plenty of podcasts / YouTube channels do this, is they make, at a certain point, they make the early episodes an archive so that they are basically unlisted. I know on the hosting service that I use for podcasts, you can just turn a published episode back into a draft status, then it'll no longer be visible. So it's not gone. It's just not visible to new people who are refreshing the feed. So I'm wondering maybe that if you have something like a bank of 200 episodes, maybe that first 25 or when everybody gets their stride going, everything beyond that could be archived.
So
Discussion.
Well, what's the rationale? You genuinely want them hidden, or?
Yeah, because like, think about it, Dave. Like, if you started your podcast in like 2015 with your Blue Yeti microphone recording in your kitchen,
Okay,
the audio is probably not as good as it would be today. So if your theory is true that someone is going to come across your podcast and go to episode 1, they're going to go, "Oh, this thing sucks. I'm gone."
Yeah, so that is absolutely another solution to address what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
it just
go ahead,
John.
No,
I was just gonna say it gave me another idea, which is the website Patreon allows you to monetize your podcast, and you can create an account, I think, for free, and then the way it works is your listeners can pay $2 a month to support the show, and in exchange, you can give them something. You can give them some swag. You can give them a mug, or you can give them access to archived episodes of the podcast. So that just gave me that idea, Catherine, because most podcasters probably don't want to right away start to charge for their podcast. It's a drastic move, and it's probably not going to work. You can do bonus episodes. I know some people have had success with that. In other words, put your podcast up once a week, and then also once a week do a mini episode that you charge, a couple dollars for or something. But that's more work. So I think that putting the archives back there is cool. That way, if you get these diehard fans who find your podcast and be like, "Yeah, I'll pay $2 a month to listen to some old episodes," and there you go.
And I do, and part of my reason of asking that is, on one hand, I'm a big believer in version 1 is better than version none. And so, of course, the first episode is not going to be as polished. It's not going to be the same quality as your 200th episode. But I felt like a little bit of a heartbreak of hey, this isn't one of our best episodes, like that kind of message. I don't want to, even on an early episode, I would hate for that kind of mixed message to go out. That's what I was thinking. Well, if you're really, then just archive them. And just as I mentioned that there's plenty of alternates to Patreon, there's Locals, there's Subscribestar, and Substack even has the archiving function like you're describing there. So that might be something some of our podcasters want to consider, is creating an archive and having that early stuff in the background there.
I think we may even all be overthinking it a little bit. Like, David, I'm sure you're introducing me to a whole swath of podcast consumption styles, but I know when I come across a new podcast, a lot of the podcasts that I would consume and a lot of the podcasts that are out there, they fall under one of two buckets. They're either going to be sort of like a series type podcast where you think of like Dr. Death, or you think of these sort of like anthology, like where they follow the episode where you have to start at episode 1, or they're going to be some kind of interview based podcast, which means you don't necessarily need to start at episode 1. So just anecdotally, when I find a new podcast, I'm not going to episode 1. I'm scrolling from the top of the feed, and it's automatically set from newest to oldest. And I'm just going to scroll to the one that looks interesting to me, and I'm going to hit that one. And I'm probably going to find one before I get to episode 1. And you're also going to have the working assumption, or if you're working under that assumption, then I'm clicking onto this episode. I liked it. I listened through to it. The audio quality is great. The content is great. And then once I work my way to episode 1, I may even want to keep that out there if it's a guest focused podcast, because it may be a guest that I haven't had on since then. And it's a great content. Even if the audio quality is not bad, I'm working under the assumption that this person's listened to a few episodes by the time they've gotten to episode 1. I would find it hard to scroll through 200 episodes without finding a single one unless I'm deliberately going for episode 1. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people do consume exactly the way you described. What is it called, Catherine? Loving counterpoint or addendum?
Loving counterpoint, yeah.
If you get a podcast recommended to you, in other words, you're getting the link to the show, not an episode, but the show.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will click on episode 1 because they're like,
totally fair.
This is, because episode 1, well, no, I guess in most feeds, episode 1 will come up, it won't come up at the
Last.
top.
Right.
Yeah, it'll come up last. All
But
right,
if it's under the other category of type of podcast where you're supposed to start at 1
in order, right?
Then that's
Serialized,
the case.
yes.
Yeah.
Serialized. Yeah. So in that case,
I think that the official stance of this podcast Super Friends, I'm going to make a motion that the official stance would be if somebody recommends a new show, you listen to the most current episode, then you can start if you're just introduced to the show, you listen to the most current episode, then you can go a wandering. If there's a specific episode that you say, then the protocol should be that person should share that episode with you.
Yeah.
I rest my case.
I think you're absolutely right. But I think maybe podcast newbies, a lot of them may assume they're supposed to start at number 1 just because it's number 1. But you're right.
Yeah, you better work your way through 200 episodes.
Well,
yeah, maybe the healthy compromise is that you're just a little nicer to yourself at the beginning of that episode 1, that audio they're adding on there. Be like, hey, just letting you know, we started this way back in the day before we really knew what we were doing. We still think you'll really enjoy the show, but just know as the show has gone on, we've got better mics, we've got better production. So don't let any negatives that you may take away from this episode deter you from enjoying the rest of the show.
I think there's a way of doing it, but I hear you, Catherine. You don't want to admit that you suck right off the bat to a new listener.
Reveal that to them later.
Right.
Once you
there's
There's
nothing wrong with archiving episodes either. Like I work with a client who it's a really, really big show, and the reason that he archived the earliest episodes of the show are because he was doing it himself. He was doing all his own editing. He was figuring out the mic situation himself before he brought me on. I totally understand archiving that stuff because potential sponsors, people are going to be scrolling through and just clicking on random episodes to see and you want it to be at that really high quality, which is why as we work with new clients, we always encourage them, let's start off on the best foot possible. Let's get that really great microphone. Let's get that really high quality production there, just because you're starting out now and the technology is there to have a great podcast from the jump.
I'm surprised that more news podcasts don't archive their stuff. After all, they're in the business of things that are new. News being the plural of new.
There's a show that does that. Are you aware of a show called Part of the Problem? Dave Smith, comedian.
Nope.
Yes.
So his show, he may have changed this, but from what I remember, they only keep about the latest 15 episodes up. Everything other than that gets archived, which I think falls under what Dave was talking about. I think there's like a Patreon that you can pay for and get every single show that they've ever done. But on Spotify or on these, the major platforms, there's only like the latest 10 or 15 that you can get, which doesn't really make sense because if I'm such a super fan that I'm giving you money, how am I missing shows for such a long time that they have to be archived and I have to pay to go get them? Or you're just re-listening to stuff over and over again because they're just that good.
One lesson I've learned many times over is to remember we're not the customer, and every audience is different. Some the archive is going to be very valuable, others it's going to be extra content. Really that's kind of a audience to audience kind of thing. So yeah. I would like to hear anybody have another trick or treat that Johnny, would you like to give up the next trick or treat?
Yeah, I had so the first one that I gave up kind of just came to me as we were going. This was the one I had planned on wanting to talk about, which was I've had a few clients come to me recently, and the fall is a weird time because one, for us, it is the time where more people are wanting to start podcasts. The summer's over, kids are back to school. We've got a little bit more time. In a lot of people's minds, I think Catherine and I might be stealing this quote from you, but it is in most adults' mind, at least those, with kids, that is your new year. The kids are starting school. The year kind of resets versus, January 1st. The other side of that is kids are back to school. We've got holidays coming up. People are traveling for work, not necessarily for the summertime. So the reason I, caveat all this is I've had a few clients come to me and say that they've had trouble booking guests recently, or they're not feeling as motivated with the quality of the guests that are accepting their requests to come on the show. And so they're feeling a little bit defeated in terms of like, well, I don't want to just stop the podcast. And so I'll put it into a specific example. So I had one client set aside some time to talk with me about this. And they said, this is our plan. We have 12 episodes that we want to release in 2025. One episode a month. We want them to be incredible A+ guests for all 12 of them. However, we're only able to get commitments from like 3 or 4 so far. And we're really having trouble of aligning all of them to fit this release schedule of one a month. What do we do? And I said, make it easier on yourself. Only book 6 of these guests. The other 6, because this is a company-focused podcast, turn the podcast internal. All of the people around you, you have multiple hosts, you have tons of people within the company that are expertise. Part of the reason why we're doing this show is to flex our muscles or flex our, our expertise as why we're this amazing company doing X. So we're going to do 6 episodes that are guest focused. The other 6 are going to be internal. You can really, really focus on a really niche topic for each of those 6 episodes, or each of those 6 episodes can be, part 1A, 1B, 1B, or 1C, all the way to 6 to lead up to this overall message that we're trying to put out there. Now you're still able to put out content for everybody, as well as get guests and not have to work as hard, because you're just not finding the guests right now because people are traveling, kids are back to school, people are busy, things happen. And so I thought that was a really good compromise that I think more podcasts should think about. And then if they wanted to you're taking a step back. So if we're only doing 1 a month now versus we were doing 2 a month before, we can still backfill that amount of content that you're putting out there by re-releasing old episodes. Every single listener that's ever listened to your podcast or follows your show or downloads the show has not listened to every single episodes. So you can still keep up with your cadence of releases by re-releasing older shows, maybe ones that you feel like got missed because they got released during Christmas or they got released in the middle of July. Find those episodes, re-release them. And then on top of that, we're doing our internal solo podcasts or with people within the company. We're not having to find external guests. And then on top of that, we have those external A+ player guests. Now we're tripling the amount of content that we're able to put out there by doing a third of the work. Granted, that internal one's going to take a lot of time and is going to require some work as well. But a lot of the problems that you're facing in terms of getting new content out there are being roadblocked by the fact that we can't find the best guests all the time, or we just can't get them on the schedule. And it's really hard to do this kind of stuff. So that was one way of thinking that I just wanted to present out there to everyone listening or watching.
That's great. Can I throw in a little idea to go along with what you were just saying?
No.
Oh, it was really good. No, it was really good. No, in that kind of situation that you're describing, this is also a great time to get back to basics and to put out some tentpole episodes. Tentpole meaning these are our core beliefs, these are our core principles. You can have just a consistent, your host with somebody who also works at the company, giving, like you were saying, we're demonstrating our expertise, but you can have some of those like main key competitive value add. This is what our business is all about. The behind the scenes kinds of things. It's a perfect time to mix those in there as well, that don't rely on guests and are like almost like a reintroducing people as if you have an entire new audience to the core beliefs, the core values, the core business practices of whoever is the focus of the podcast there.
Yeah. And when you're developing this internal podcast that you're going to be doing where it's not necessarily guest focused, if you're stuck on, well, what do we talk about? You go back to who's listening, who is the audience? Why did we make this podcast in the first place? Is this for all of the people that are in our industry? Great. That's a great launching point. What do the people in our industry care about the most? We'll talk about that. Is our audience all of our investors? Great. We're keeping them updated on everything we're doing within the company to make us more valuable to them. Great. Any number of type of audiences, audience types, but think about who is the person actually listening and create content for them. That's what you've been doing this whole time, but you go on autopilot at some point.
What are the top 5 questions this audience has?
Yeah.
And what you're saying really strikes a chord with me, because one of my clients, we're going to be developing for next summer a series that's exclusively it's a little bit out of the box. It's designed to be a resource to people in the entire field of the, I don't know how to describe it without.
We don't want to dox these people.
Yeah, I don't want to. We're not letting it out, but we're creating a resource for a particular group, for an audience. Even if they don't ever do business with my client, it's going to be a resource because it's answering the questions of the type of people that would be a consumer of their product. So it's not specific to my client. It is just like a pure resource that anybody could listen to and get value from. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Anybody finding it harder to get guests these days?
I know I picked up on what Johnny was saying there.
That was the whole thesis behind, my trick or treat was they're just finding it harder to find, not necessarily find guests, because I get, my inbox is flooded every day with people like, please bring this person on the podcast. Those people suck. Getting those people, finding really high quality guests is just, for whatever reason, feels like it's been harder lately.
Yeah. Yeah. So
are you having that experience, Matt? Yeah.
Yeah. However, when I don't have guests, and I fall behind on this, it's my own fault. I think what I kind of do is I carpet bomb my email like 5 or 6 up to 10 people who I want to have on the show. And then I give them an option to book in. And so my solution for capturing the podcast guests is tools like OneSub and Calendly. And it really allows people to schedule themselves into the show. Yeah. So if I want to have somebody from Australia on, they've got some choices on when they can do it. I also give a little, a variety. I'll record sometimes in the evening. I want to give a little bit of different times when people can come on. But I basically put the calendar up and say, this is the availability of when I can record. And you pick a time and it will send back all the details. I'll send them a link to a Squadcast. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to do that with Descript Rooms. It could be Riverside by that point. We don't know. However, it's just, if you can make it as easy as possible to schedule, it won't be such a pain in the ass, because, 2 people trying to figure out a time and you throw in time zones. The worst. Hey, we're not recording this day. I've got some other people. And the minute somebody fills that time, nobody else can take that time. So if I've got another call, that option is gone from the calendar. So look into those tools. $190 a year is what I pay for OneSub, but I look at the amount of time I'm saving doing a weekly podcast, and it's good. It's all worth it.
And what do you do during the times? So let's say that you have Wednesday from noon to 2 open to record. You don't have a guest booked for that week and you need an episode to go out. Are you 2 or 3 episodes deep in production to where it doesn't really matter and you can sacrifice a couple of weeks, or what's the worst case scenario?
So this week is the worst case scenario, actually, because I got caught up with other things and I didn't have an episode ready to go this week. So I'm going with a feed drop of all things. Okay. So we're going to be playing an episode from Podcast Perspectives, which is put out by the Podglomerate and Jeff Umbro, who is talking with Sean Howard from Flight Path. Sean Howard's actually Canadian. And so I thought, here's an opportunity to have somebody interview something that's just a little bit above my pay grade. Flight Path is about, finding inventory for podcast ad and ad tech. So I'll let them do the work, and we'll do a show swap, and that will solve my problem for this week.
Matt, would you ever consider, how would you feel if, say you didn't have access to the feed drop, say for whatever reason you're not able to get one of those in? What are your thoughts on, you're in worst case scenario, you don't have a feed drop. I'm instead going to reach out to the host of this podcast that I was just on, get their episode of them not necessarily interviewing me, but an episode where I was a part on their podcast, and we post that on our feed.
Yeah, so that was the trade I did with the Podglomerate, where they're doing that because I interviewed Jeff Umbro, and he's going to be releasing that U.S. Thanksgiving weekend.
Dave, do you have any suggestions or thoughts about in this situation that we're describing, going solo and having your own episode that is just you talking, going free here?
I'm not a fan.
I was just about to say Dave loves going solo. He would love that.
I thought I was said.
So I mean, you have to have a real plan, or I mean, I do listen to a podcast called Hit Parade. Forget the guy's name, but it's about music, as you can imagine. It is a single person podcast, but it's pretty much scripted, and he's giving you a lot of history of music and playing clips of songs and stuff. So it moves along. For a single person to kind of vibe, and it's tough to keep people's attention when there's no back and forth. The conversation, that ping-ponging effect that you have of a conversation, is what keeps that the listener's attention, in my opinion. And so I'd suggest, if you do it, I've done it before, like when my co-host isn't available, I've done it solo, but I've made it. You got to have a real shtick. You got to have something. Like I'm good. One time I was stuck for an episode. I said, well, we're going to count down the top 10 dad jokes of all time. And here we go with number 1. I played a sound effect. I told the joke. It was a really quick podcast, but I got something out there. Maybe people got a laugh. That's how I would handle it.
Chris,
That's what I do, Kath. By the way, I do that, Catherine. So I'll go solo as a way just to, and generally what happens is I write something and I'm cantankerous, unhappy, cranky, and I basically tell the listeners of my podcast what they're doing wrong, how they can't write themselves. There's no hope or future for them, and they should quit. They should take 2 weeks off and quit whatever it is that they're doing. And then I sort of will massage around the edges, and I'll make it nicer. And eventually we'll arrive at something that we can put out. In the end, it's about 8, 10, 12 minutes of me talking. It does take a long time to do. It does take writing. It does take, but you know what? People love it. People really like it. They like being told to quit.
Give me permission to quit. Come on.
And
now.
I think our absent friend Jag would have something to say, because he does a solo pod, right? But people are listening for him to get advice about podcasts, and he's going to give it to you. So I mean, a lot depends on what the show is like. If the show rises and falls based on the chemistry between the two co-hosts, then why would I want to listen to one of you? So there you go.
It's good exercise, though, ultimately, to be able to just sit by yourself and just kind of stream of consciousness go off of notes. And I think that having to do that, being forced to do that every once in a while, will probably sharpen your skills up a little bit once you have somebody to interact with, because you may be able to go on longer tangents before if that person's not as open or they're not a great guest. But to David's Hit Parade with Chris Mollenfee.
There you go. Thank you.
And you have a music podcast, don't you, David?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting.
Do you?
You mentioned that. Yeah, it's called, what's it called again?
A top 10 time machine.
Go to
Dust off the
timemachine.com.
podcast lore book. Go to David's podcast chat.
I purposely left it out today.
No, you have to put it in every episode, or else the show doesn't count.
Timemachinepod.com. Go to
timemachinepod.com. I'm getting credit for this appearance here. So yeah, you got to mention it.
Thank you. Yep.
Any burning? We're running close to time here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the podcastification of our election without getting political. Just to maybe close out any burning tricks before we move on to that treat, or vice versa.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're going to talk about that. But I just have the one thing: Canadian Podcast Awards nominations are open. There's the website, and I'm going to put it in the comments section. And I will point out that this podcast is we're going to submit, because we qualify, because one of the hosts is Canadian, and it's produced in Canada. So let's see what we can. Hopefully, we can get some hardware.
That's
real quick.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I would say on the election season, if you're going to do an election show, have a point. Don't just have talking about the election. I'll give an example and a shameless plug for a podcast that I produce. Attorney Evan Shine's podcast is called Shine On. He deals a lot with divorces, but also families, relationships. He had an expert to come on and talk about how to handle your family, like, at Thanksgiving when it's a house divided politically. Yeah. And so that was enough of a twist that made it a very interesting show. That's my advice.
Johnny?
I would say the same thing. We just put out a podcast on Tuesday I'll plug one of my shows, The Fort with Chris Powers. He had on the Florida Speaker of the House, and not the Speaker of the House of the government, the state Speaker of the House. And, everyone has their own political views, but it's good to have someone, if you're going to do something like that, have somebody on who is an expert that kind of knows what they're talking about. Because you don't want to make yourself look dumb if you just are really passionate about something, but you don't really know a whole ton about it. Not saying that Chris doesn't know those things. He just had on the speaker. It was good. It was a good episode. Go ahead, man.
Were you going to talk about No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, in terms of the podcastification of the elections, I saw a really great post the other day that said this is the turning point where every election after this is going to be podcast focused. This one is really podcast heavy. JD Vance is going on Joe Rogan tomorrow, so they're going to have Trump and JD Vance on there. They're probably still trying to get Waltz and Kamala on. But this has really been the election where he said it started gradually and then all at once, all of a sudden.
Correct.
A lot of where the big it's going to be less so about what you can do on TV and CNN and Fox and MSNBC and all these channels, and more so about reaching the people who are consuming podcasts, because that's where the majority of people are. The demographic that watches daily news television is aging out, and the new generation, it does not watch that stuff. That's not where the people are. And it's going to be really good for everybody, because it's going to force people who are going to hold power to actually talk unscripted for a couple hours, and we're going to hear what they actually think, rather than, a 5-minute speech or a 5-minute, softball thing on a local news channel. So I think it's going to be good.
And I've been working with one of my clients on an election issue in Florida. Yes on 4. It's a bill about abortion. They have produced a 7-part series featuring abortion stories, and you listen to the stories and make a decision on whether or not you want to vote yes on 4.
Yeah.
Writing Class Radio is the podcast that did that.
And I'll say this, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this with the Super Friends specifically is because, sort of to Johnny's point, is I was seeing a lot of people complaining, like, this isn't the first presidential election that is podcast heavy. Yes, for us people who have been deep in the niche for a long time, that is correct. But the point to not be missed is this is the mainstreaming of podcasts for the wider general audience. Something that podcasters have been wanting for a very long time is that breakthrough to a wide mass audience, and to not ignore that. Like, I don't want people to overlook that. Instead of yes, you can remind us how you've been the cool kid and you heard Obama on Mark Maron. Yes, great. Point for you. But this could be really a breakthrough moment in a lot of ways for podcasting at all. I also want to say too, I've been really thrilled with candidates who are going on, let's say, unlikely podcasts. So, for example, Donald Trump went on Theo Vaughn, a comedian, his podcast, and the conversation, because it was unstructured and free-flowing, it went into talking a lot about recovery. And for those who don't know, Theo Vaughn is in recovery. So talking about issues of drug addiction, and that totally unexpected for where that conversation would go, and it hit on some very important things. And to Johnny's point, again, that is just really important, something that maybe we wouldn't have heard in other years past. So I'm really enjoying the unlikely places that candidates are ending up to talk about the issues.
I think it's happened because people have lost trust in mainstream media, whether it's Fox or CNN, local radio station, any one of those things. But people trust their favorite podcaster. Yeah. And so this seems like a great place to go. And also the amount of time that candidates can spend talking. It's not going to be a 10-minute sit down where they're going to get their points across. They actually have to sit and talk for the duration of the show. And it's actually a sticking point right now for Kamala Harris going on Joe Rogan. They only want to do an hour, and of course, none of his shows go an hour. They go the distance.
Well, and they want him to come to her. Like that part really, you know, I see a lot of discourse back and forth about that of like, well, her schedule is really busy. He should really make time to go do that. But you know, I don't know. Rogan does you do Rogan, you go on Rogan, you go to Austin to do it. This should be like the biggest thing. I mean, just case in point, Trump's episode with him has been out for 3 days on YouTube. It's got 39 million views. You're telling me that that's not valuable?
Exactly.
You're telling me that you are going to force him to come to you and only do an hour? You have to go to him. You have to go into the fire. Trump did it. Vance is doing it. If you want a serious chance at winning an election, this is going to be boilerplate stuff. You're going to have to do Rogan, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, this might be a spooky place to leave things, everybody, but we have just been so wonderfully enjoying talking to our audience, the Podcast Super Friends audience. Let's go around and we'll say goodbye to our dear listeners, our dear audience, and we'll start with the eminently crushable Johnny Podcast.
I wish more people had crushes on me, but apparently that doesn't. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please follow the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, follow on Apple Podcasts, follow all four of us, including Jag, on social media. X is probably the best place to do it. DM him, ask him how Disneyland was, and thank you for tuning in.
And before we go on to the next person, Johnny, are you handing out candy, lights off, or a bowl of candy on your porch?
I'm going to be sitting in a deer blind on Halloween.
So we'll just say lights off.
None of the above.
Lights off at your house. Matt.
So I'm going to have a smart bulb, 2 smart bulbs that are going to flicker orange, and they've also got settings such as red rum.
Ooh,
so yeah,
scary.
We're gonna have we're gonna be the scariest house on the block. Matt Kundle, Sound Off Media Company, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada.
Dave?
David Yaz, pod617.com in Boston. I live in an apartment complex. I don't think there are trick-or-treaters, but I've already been to a Halloween party where my son dressed up as Woody and I dressed up as Buzz Lightyear.
Oh.
To infinity and beyond. Thank you.
We need pictures of that. And I'm Catherine O'Brien in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Come over and see me on Twitter. Hello, Catherine O. And I think that we're going to be handing out candy. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you the next time with the Podcast Super Friends.
Thanks for listening to the Podcast Super Friends. For a transcript of the show or to connect with the Super Friends, go to the show notes of this episode or go to soundoff.network.